13 meters from the start point in the think park, about 4,000 years ago, a talented man called Abraham was born who had very much compassion for his animals. He tamed them and used them to cross vast stretches of desert that were uncrossable before, and he discovered unknown lands that he settled in. When asked which gods guided him so well to success, he claimed that it was none of the gods they knew, but a new personal God who claimed to work alone, named Jehovah. Jehovah was not really a new God, but a new addition of a lonely God who claimed to be superior to the other gods. This new addition to the family of gods was adopted by Abraham. Many joined his group and adopted his God as their own. They traveled to many lands, and their unity made them very prosperous. One group traveled to a faraway land called Egypt, settled there, and prospered. Many centuries later, a king of Egypt saw he could exploit these hard-working people and conquered them and made them work like slaves for life. 11 meters from the start point in the think park, about 600 years later, a slave called Moses was born in Egypt who had very much compassion for his fellow slaves. Listening to his intuition and using his wisdom, he was able to unite the slaves. He knew that united they would stand, but divided they would fall, and he united the fleeing slaves with morals that directed people to respect nature. Moses, with the slaves he freed, spent an entire generation looking for the very best land to settle in. When they found it, they killed the inhabitants and claimed the land as their own. The land became very prosperous, and the people who were once slaves became very rich and famous all over the world. When asked which gods guided them so well to prosperity, their leaders claimed that it was the personal God of Abraham. Seeing the power of this new God, people quickly converted and adapted the morals of these prosperous people, and they all prospered in the land they called Judea. They were called Jews. 8 meters from the start point in the think park, about 1,000 years later, a son of the king of Nepal was born. Gautama Buddha was a very sensitive child. Seeing suffering for the very first time when he was 30 years old left him devastated. He came to believe that suffering was caused by people confusing their wants with their needs. He had everything and wanted nothing but inner peace. And there were poor, sick men who had nothing and needed everything. Through meditation, Buddha saw that we would all suffer less if we accepted what we were given by God and not desired anything else, believing what we are given is what we really need. He preached that suffering is an inherent part of existence and that the origin of suffering is greed. 7 meters from the start point in the think park, about 300 years later, the quest for knowledge reached a peak. A new breed of men called philosophers evolved. One of the greatest was the private teacher of Alexander the Great of Greece. Aristotle claimed that knowledge must be sought, captured, and accumulated. Under Aristotle's tutelage, Alexander found knowledge from faraway civilizations and accumulated it in great libraries for all mankind to exploit. Aristotle claimed that money was not a commodity of trade, but rather a law of measure, claiming that money should not be equated with wealth, but rather considered a human right. Aristotle claimed that we can gain understanding by investigation and extrapolation of our observations by reason and logic. As an example, he concluded that the sun revolved around the earth by observing it during the day and extrapolating its movement during the night. By observing an apple and a leaf fall, he concluded that heavy objects fall faster than lighter objects. 6 meters from the start point in our think park, about 300 years later, a poor but generous Jew was born called Jesus, who had very much compassion for his fellow man. He saw too much greed in his fellow Jews and too much arrogance. Listening to his intuition and using his wisdom, he tried to unite all people, Jews and non-Jews. While Jews jealously guarded their God as only theirs, this rebel Jew, Jesus, offered it to everyone. While Jews had an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth morals, the rebel Jews insisted that it is better to get 2 slaps than to lose 2 eyes, and this was so radical to other Jews, people following this rebel were called Christians. Their belief was called Christianity. Jesus' rebellion caused the Jews to be divided, and soon after, they were not powerful enough to protect themselves. They were conquered and dispersed all over the world. Jesus offered man a new morality for uniting all of man with nature so that he may live more and more in peace in an everlasting, shrinking world. He taught we must love nature that provides for all people, and we must love all her people, even if they are our enemies. He claimed that if we follow his message, we will one day find an everlasting peace. He warned and prophesied that if we do not follow his message of salvation, the world would end up just like it actually did. About 400 years later, Attila was born. He was a Mongolian boy in a family of rulers and kings of the Huns, a union of nomadic tribes stretching from Mongolia to Turkey along the Siberian plains. They hunted with bows and arrows on horseback, and as they rode into new territories, they gained a reputation for plundering and pillaging. They were barbarians who were like plows overturning overgrown, choked gardens, clearing them of weeds and preparing them for new growth. They expanded to the outskirts of the Roman Empire, where they were considered barbarians, the Hell's Angels of their time. The Romans hired them whenever they needed fearless soldiers to police their outposts. Attila's relatives over many generations grew to be rulers of Europe. Charlemagne was the greatest of them. Charlemagne lived 300 years later and had 20 children with 8 of his 10 known wives. He became the founding father of all European monarchies. About 200 years later, in 600 AC, at the 4-meter mark in our think park, an inspired man called Mohammed was born in a part of the world where the people were very divided. They were neither Jews nor Christians. He needed his people to be as united as the Jews and as meek as the Christians. So he listened to his intuition and was able to unite his people under the same God that both Jews and Christians followed. They called their belief Islam, and people called them Muslims. They prospered and blossomed to a great civilization known for their gifted scientists. Christian leaders took great offense, and for 200 years, Christians and Muslims crusaded and killed each other in the name of the same God.